Okay, good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It's Wednesday, January 10th, 2018. Happy New Year to everyone. We are here at the Freeport High School Library, and all of the members are here except for Sarah. I haven't heard anything, so I'm guessing she'll be here shortly, but we'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, adjustments to the agenda. We are going to move 8A up right after our first public comment, and other than that, we will carry on as it shows on the agenda. So we'll open it up for public comment now. If anybody had anything they'd like to share.
Good evening. My name is John Morris. I'm a selectman from the town of Pownell, and I'd like to comment on the consideration in the cost-sharing review. I have a letter from the selectman of the town of Pownell that I wish to share. It says, "Dear directors of the RSU 5, it has come to our attention that consideration is being given to conducting a study of the funding formula for the RSU 5. That is the amount of funding that each of the three communities are assessed for the education of the children from each community. Seems important to remain with the original intent of the establishment of the RSU 5, and that funding was based upon school-age population and property valuation with other factors considered. We certainly encourage that a study be conducted and the results looked at with an eye towards fairness towards each community in the district. The population of the three communities has certainly changed on a percentage basis over the past 10 years, and this is the time to see exactly what else has changed. Again, we urge the directors study this issue a report that is concise and understandable, and that if changes are recommended that the course of action to make those changes be embarked upon." I'd also like to include my own comments, which come as a parent of three boys, with regards to the cost-sharing formula. This was inserted into the RSU 5 formula to ensure that the three towns' contributions would be assessed fairly. I believe it was evident through Mr. Stockmeyer's December presentation that there is an inherent lack of fairness in Pownell's assessment caused by using a number correlating to Pownell's original contribution at the RSU startup and the current cost-sharing algorithm. Using the combined property evaluation / student population coefficient, Pownell is being overassessed by around 2%. The cost-sharing formula is adjusted for current numbers. The resulting adjustment for Pownell's contribution results in a 5% tax decrease for Pownell residents. Once again, the cost-sharing revenue review process was inserted into the RSU covenant to ensure fairness. The need to review and then adjust the town's contributions is a commitment to the proposition that the school district is truly the sum of equal parts. What is fair for one town is fair for all. It's a simple act to adjust the assessments based on the accurate numbers using the original equation of property evaluation and student numbers. There's no need to belabor valuation, revenue, or any other numbers that aren't salient, that are not germane to the cost-sharing formula. So just as a representative of town of Pownell, I urge you not to pass this review by as something that is just to check off a checklist. There is an inherent fairness in the assessment. We're only asking to contribute our fair share. Pownell recently went through a revaluation in order to have relevant figures so that this assessment could be done. So I appreciate your time and your consideration of this matter. Any
Thank
questions? You. Great.
My name is Kevin Netto, and I am chairman of the Durham Board of Selectmen. I'm speaking only for myself, though we have not met on this issue and discussed this issue, so I want to be clear about that. I would agree with John. I see no problem with looking at the formula and making sure it was fair, because I think that's what we all want. I think the issue becomes, and the challenge becomes, how you define fairness. I believe I think John might be incorrect that the original formula was based on pupils and valuation. I believe it was I learned today actually for the first time that it was based on the amount that each town was paying at the time their RSU was formed in additional local monies and their percent of the total additional local monies amongst those 3 towns. I think there's value in looking at the formula for a couple of reasons. One is to see if there is any inequity. And 2, the current formula applied to additional local monies is obviously not relevant anymore because we are 10 years past when those percentages were established. So looking at those, I think, makes sense. I think what I would caution the board about, though, is the first step is determining, well, what is the criteria upon which fairness will be based? Is it valuation? Is it population? Is it something else? I think that decision has to come first, almost before you run the numbers and see where it lands, because otherwise you end up, well, here's my result that I want, and now I need to go shop for a formula that'll get me there. So I think it's very important to establish the criteria first, and then let the chips fall where they may. And if it's a fair process and a fair formula, and even if it results in an increase to Durham, then I will do my best to communicate that to the citizens of Durham and get them to understand it, because fair is fair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So we are going to jump ahead to 8A, how the board functions. I think one of the things that we have heard from our last meeting till today from a variety of folks on the board is that our desire to be a more efficient board Marathon, I was looking at when I was pulling up my papers today, I was looking that we all still have this neon green paper in our folders every week about our RSU 5 board protocol. Obviously, number 1 is children's interests come first. There's a variety of other things that we all sort of agree to as our protocol. I guess I would just bring people's eyes down to number 10 and 11, which is avoid marathon meetings and practice efficient decision making. We have a lot of things that we learn about on a bi-weekly basis here. Some of the things we need action on. Some of them are purely for informative educational purposes. And I think we need to try and focus our efforts on the action items. And certainly we want to make sure people understand everything that's coming out. But we need to be more efficient and move through our agenda in a concise manner. So to that end, Becky and I, we have a slightly different agenda than you all do. We have these little orange numbers or letters on ours, and we have times that we've set up for the different discussion items, and a goal to try and keep us on track of not having meetings that are running past the 10 o'clock timeline. So, we have ambitious agendas and we have inquisitive members, but we need to make sure that we're getting through our items. So that's one of the things that you'll see if we get to the end of our time frame, and we'll share that before we start each item, what we've sort of allocated. If it's an action item and we've run out of time, then we'll see if people are comfortable taking the action at that point. If not, we'll move it to another meeting. We're not going to eat up other people's time, in respect for our guests who come and speak to us, our administrators. And if it's not an action item, then we just move on. We've got the information we need, and if people need additional information, we can work on that later. So to that end, one of the other things we're doing is you'll see on here that after the administrative reports, we're moving policy up to the top. We have 3 primary goals as a board of directors for a school district. It's hire and evaluate a superintendent, it's pass the budget, and it's provide policy. So, that is, unfortunately, to Cynthia, it always seems to be at the end of our agendas, and we're all either fried or can't even get there, and bounce them from meeting to meeting. So in an effort to not do that, we're going to move them up on the agenda so we make sure we're doing our duty as a board and getting those policies reviewed and approved. So, I mean, that's basically what we're looking to do. We want to be efficient. We want to be concise. We're going to run our meetings as we say we should. Lindsay here has been reading Robert's rules to keep us up to date. You know, we'll try to avoid repeating the same comments. If your point has been made, then we move on. You know, the point of our discussion is not to try and sell people on your position. It's state your position, and then we'll vote as a board. We'll make sure that we're acknowledging speakers so that it can be fair and make sure everybody's getting called on. Lindsay's going to help me in that. If I'm not seeing someone's hands up, she's going to nudge me and make sure that we recognize everybody who has a contribution to the conversation. So I think, you know, that's our goal. We're going to try to stay, we don't want to be 30,000 feet because we need to have information to make good decisions, but we don't need to be in the weeds either. So we're going to try and find that happy medium of being informed but efficient. So that's all I had on that. I don't know if anybody has any questions, thoughts? What's that? For that one?
You have about 8 more minutes.
Yeah. Because we didn't take into account anybody speaking at public comment. Because they never do. I know, that's true. See, it's a learning process. So, okay. Good. Thank you very much for that. And so now we'll move on to 6, administrator reports. Tonight we have Craig is providing the athletics report, and Bonnie Violet will be providing the instructional support report. And between the two of them, we have 40 minutes.
Oh, goodness.
Go.
I won't take 20.
You only get half of that.
Yeah, I won't even take 20, I hope. Well, thank you. Good evening. I'm Craig Sickles, the athletic administrator. I'm just going to go through the packet that was sent. I think you all had previously. The first page, I think you have seen that already in one of Becky's reports. Just thought I would include it. The fall is over and done, and we're not quite halfway through the winter season, but did want to bring that to your attention. The second page is kind of interesting. It's a history of our participation levels in sports. The actual numbers of students who participated in a fall, winter, in spring, and then the number of students that participated at any one time throughout that year, counting each student only once. And of course, this year, for the middle school numbers in the winter, we don't have indoor track in there yet because that doesn't start until after February break. So those numbers will go up a little bit when we start indoor track. We count them in the winter numbers. The next page I thought might be of interest. That's a listing of all of our teams. When it says head coach cross country, know that there's a girls cross country team and a boys cross country team. While they practice together, they compete separately and get separate scores. So the total number of teams, there's a number in the bottom right-hand corner of each season. So at the high school level, we have a total of 39 teams. At Durham Community School, 16. At Freeport Middle School, 29. The RSU has a total of 84 teams. Thought that's a pretty significant number, I think. Got a lot of kids participating. There were some questions earlier on that Becky had forwarded to me. The next couple of pages actually are excerpts from the Coach's Handbook that can be found online on our athletic website. Just go under Coaches, and you'll see Coach's Handbook. And this information is all right there. So the evaluation process, the quick overview, the varsity coaches are evaluated by myself every other year, and then the off year is a self-eval. And I think that's very similar to what the teachers do. They're evaluated every other year, and in the off year, I'm sorry?
They have a summative every third year, but every year they get feedback similar to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. The JV coaches and sub-varsity coaches are evaluated by the varsity coaches, again, every other year with a self-eval in the off year. The The varsity coaches meet with their sub-varsity coaches. Those evaluations are then passed on to me. I don't necessarily meet with every JV coach, but if there's something that jumps out in their evaluation of their sub-varsity coaches, I may very well meet with a sub-varsity coach. What I didn't list here is the middle school coaches. They are evaluated by the middle school assistants, and then those are passed on to me as well, and then I pass them on to the central office. I don't know if there's any questions.
Assistant principals? You said the middle school assistants?
The middle school assistant ADs.
Oh, assistant ADs, okay.
Yep, sorry.
If I'm remembering correctly, in the teacher evaluation process, which is a different beast, but I did appreciate that there were some opportunities for parent and student feedback. Am I remembering that correctly? Becky, do you know?
Currently, we are. I'm going to look at Cynthia because I don't think it's in there currently like that. So I think at one point
Maybe I remember talking about
there might have been something about surveys, and then we had talked about how you can't use surveys as part of the student growth data. But we
Right.
don't have anything currently in the system where there is a every year that students or teachers or parents are surveyed. Is it something that we encourage and that many of the schools do in different ways? Yes, but it's not anything that's required.
Right. I guess I would just encourage a way to have parent and student feedback productively involved in coaches' development. So it seems a little bit, if only the AD and the coach, him or herself, are the people evaluating, that really leaves out the perspectives of a lot of people who are affected by the position. So if there's some way over time to, and maybe this happens in some way, shape, or form that I'm not aware of, but helping the feedback, positive or negative, get to the coaches so that they're aware of how they're influencing their players and the players' parents.
I think there's a lot of informal communications that occur on sidelines and throughout the course of a season between parents, myself, and students and myself. But I think until there's a accepted way of doing that for teachers first, I mean, that's certainly much more of an important role as opposed to a $4,000 part-time seasonal coach. I think until there's a accepted way of doing that for teachers, I don't know why we would do it for coaches first when that process hasn't been thought out and vetted through the union and the teachers' evaluation as well.
Actually, I have a different memory of that. What we do. I feel like it wasn't in the professional growth and evaluation. My memory of it was that administrators did have the ability to communicate feedback, positive or negative, that they were receiving as part of ongoing conversations with teachers, but it wouldn't affect their pay.
Well,
Or
their
their-
evaluation doesn't affect their pay at all right now, so.
Okay.
Well, and what you just said is what there are conversations that I have with parents and boosters and players, and based on what that information is, I then have a conversation with the coach.
Okay.
So
That's basically what I'm asking for.
right, and we do have a board policy that's a complaint policy that would apply to coaches as well as teachers, so that any time that there's a complaint brought against a coach or a teacher or an administrator, we ensure that we pass that along to the person and they have a chance to provide their side of the story, and that we take that feedback and we continuously strive to improve both in the classroom and on the field with athletics.
I would like to echo Lindsay's sentiment. I think it is a wise idea to have a formal process for including student-athlete feedback and parent-athlete feedback. And in regards to the teacher evaluation, the way I recall it from that conversation is that the 20% that is student growth wouldn't be appropriate for feedback from students and parents or other stakeholder groups. However, the 80% of the professional growth and evaluation of the teachers would be an appropriate place to include surveys or data that comes back from stakeholder groups in the form of surveys or any other way to collect that information. So from my perspective, the fact that the 20% in the teacher evaluation doesn't accept student feedback and parent feedback should in no regard preclude that feedback from being included in the teacher evaluation or following the same thought process in the coach evaluation. So I would prefer to see 360 reviews for everyone, teachers, coaches, administrators, superintendent. So hopefully that's the way that the district is going, but I don't want to create the situation where because one group doesn't have it yet, then no one else can get started on it. And I think the feedback is absolutely central to improving the services that we provide for our students.
And, surveying them doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be tied to the evaluation either. So, I guess I feel my sense, and perhaps it's completely inaccurate, is that people feel more comfortable calling a coach and complaining, if you will, than they do about calling a teacher.
I don't know if that would be.
No, you don't think so?
There's a lot on the line for athletes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, maybe.
not
I think
my-
that.
that's not my experience.
No.
No, if you don't get to play, if you call, you don't call. And that's the attitude of a lot of students and parents too.
Yeah. So, obviously, we want to encourage everybody to provide feedback if they have it, good or bad. Whether that gets included in their evaluation, I think that's a different conversation. But certainly encouraging parents, certainly if they're unhappy with something a coach is doing. It is a slightly different animal in that they're taking kids off site. It's not like there's always the potential that the principal's going to pop in and see what they're doing, right? So making sure that there's some accountability, I think is important in the coaches. So. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that we're hearing in the community that parents would like more 360 feedback opportunities, and it's not about complaints necessarily, it's about evaluation of how the coaches are doing. But I want to step back to the hiring procedures because you didn't really go over that page that much.
I haven't got there yet. That's the next page.
Oh, great, then I'll stop. I have it before evaluation procedures.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe
all
you
right.
do. Maybe I put them in the wrong order on my list. Okay, so the hiring procedures, all stipend positions are one-year appointments. All positions are posted in-house each year. All candidates must provide an application for the first time. Someone who is reapplying for the second time, third time, whatever, just needs to provide a letter of interest. New positions, or when positions become vacant, again, they're posted in-house, and if there aren't any satisfactory candidates, we then post out of house. And those are advertised on the school website, the same online social places as the teacher positions in the newspapers. We put them on the student notices as well. When we hire varsity coaches, we have interview committees made up of parents, administrators, coaches who are already on staff, and maybe a teacher as well. For sub-varsity positions, those, when we have more than one applicant, those interviews are conducted with the varsity coach and myself, and the middle school positions are either myself or the middle school AD. And again, this is the excerpt from the handbook that outlines that process.
Thanks for that, Craig. So the coach's handbook, is it a coach's handbook, or is that like policy throughout the state that that's how athletic directors should hire?
No, that's our own coach's handbook.
So
Some
it's
schools-
like guidelines, like recommendations?
That's how we do it.
So my question is around in-house versus out-of-house hiring, and it says here, it's up to your discretion regarding whether or not, if we have qualified applicants in-house, you decide whether or not we should also post outside, and I totally appreciate the reasons behind that. But it's hard to assess what qualifications might be outside of the district without first posting the position. So is that consistent with all districts? Do
Pretty much.
they always hire inside before?
Well, you think they don't always hire inside before, but if you have a qualified candidate in-house, and with all things considered equal, it's so much more beneficial to have a coach who's walking the halls, who has kids in the class, who can walk into the lunchroom, knows the synergistic effect of that involvement in the classroom, in the hall, and study hall, and lunch, and then outside on the the playing fields, is so much beneficial to the relationship, to the team, to the bonding, to the chemistry, as opposed to having someone come in from the outside who's only here during practice, doesn't know them away from practice. There are some outside coaches who are very good at trying to increase the amount of time that they do try to interact with the kids. We have many coaches who coach in the fall who come and watch winter games. So while it's possible to make those connections, and some of those connections are great, it certainly doesn't compare to the amount of time and the connection that a teacher coach can make during the school day in the building. And I think the other thing too is a teacher coach has a bigger picture perspective a lot of times. They see the overall benefit of where the athletic and sports fit in. Sometimes you get a coach from the outside who doesn't have an educational background, and sometimes they may have blinders and all they see is their sport. We're very fortunate that we have had some very, very good outside coaches that don't have blinders on.
Thank you.
And I think the key to that for me is making sure that, it's not a very last resort, like, well, nobody even applied, I guess we'll post externally, right? So if you don't have a qualified candidate, even if you had a candidate in-house, I would hope if you didn't feel strongly that were capable of coaching this team, successfully, that you would post it externally to ensure that you were getting the best candidate, not just like, well, nobody applied, I guess we have to post it externally.
Absolutely.
Valley.
So one comment about that, Greg, you said about all things being equal, we want to get the coach from the inside, and I totally respect and support that idea, all things being equal. But back to Maddie's point, how do we know if everything is equal if we don't see the out-of-house candidates?
Well, I think
at
that's
the same
also
time?
Yeah, that's also based on the evaluation. So if we have a coach, whether it's a teacher coach or a non-teacher coach, if over a two-year period, 3-year period, their evaluations are such, they're not growing, they're not providing, they're not following through, they're not living up to the coach's job description. There are things that are constantly being marked as a 1 or a 2 versus a 3 or a 4. That right there would be a reason why we would advertise outhouse, even though we had someone in, or even though we had a current coach. So I think it's just not my decision. It's also based on their past performance, and people aren't knocking down the door to coach. There is a coaching shortage. There's an official shortage, and so you have to be a little bit careful of we know what we have. If we go out and advertise, that person's probably not going to reapply because they've had the job and now you're going to advertise, and so there's no guarantee of what you're going to get is better than what you already have. And so that's why working with coaches to become better is also important, to professional development and mentoring them and helping them to become better is important as well.
It's fair to bring up that competition is healthy. I mean, as a as a sort of premise for inspiring the best performance. And so I'm having a hard time seeing what the drawback is of posting every position, internal, external, and just may the best coach get the job.
We would not have applicants. No one's going to come
Well,
here.
then there's no problem in posting it. Like, I don't
but
see
no
the
one's going to
drawback.
apply if.
Well, then there's no
No one's going to
problem.
apply if they know their position is going to be posted in the newspaper every year. No one would apply.
Oh, no one internally would apply.
No one would apply if they know that their position is going to be posted every year.
Didn't you tell me that, I mean, isn't that what this says, though? Is that every year,
Yep.
every position is a one-year appointment?
Yep.
So is this sort of unwritten understanding among coaches
Well, I
that
think
they
that-
get, once they get a job, it's pretty much theirs unless they really mess up?
Through the evaluation process. Yep.
And that's the same for our extracurricular. So we don't every year post to see who the advisor to the yearbook's going to be. So they're evaluated, and if they're doing a job that we're satisfied with, it's kind of theirs until they resign.
So if you look at the newspaper, there aren't a lot being advertised now. Those typically in the spring are. So when you see coaching positions advertised, you're not going to see 84 positions advertised. You're going to see the ones that are vacant because someone has left or someone hasn't been doing their job. But Gorham's not going to list 84 positions in the newspaper.
And neither do we have the capacity to put together 84 teams, right? And when I say teams, I mean just hiring teams,
Right.
right?
Right. So
Good points.
Yeah. So I mean, it really does come back to, for me, the evaluation process, right? I mean, because that's the trigger on whether we're going to try and find a replacement. So to make sure that we're being faithful to our process, I think is important. So we are at 20 minutes and 40 seconds, people.
Okay.
There we go.
Moving on.
Thank you, Craig.
I wanted to ask how you're planning on moving the department forward. So maybe we'll do that some other time.
I have a quick handout.
We'll take it.
So the two ways that I was going to address that question was, again, this is part of the varsity coach's job description. It's in the handbook. It's called Varsity Coach's Supervisory Responsibility. It talks about them working with middle school coaches. It talks about them being their sports curriculum coordinator, what's taught, how it's taught, when it's taught, the systematic and sequential teaching of skills, drills, terminology, and that type of thing. And certainly some sports lend itself to that more than other sports. Football certainly lends itself to that. Cross-country running, maybe not so much, but I still think there are connections that can be made. So this was an emphasis this year, and it's going to be more of an emphasis next year. And so I think that'll go a long way with helping. It's like math. What do you learn at this level? What do you learn at the next level? What are we going to call it? Is we going to call it a block out, a check out, or the box out? So that's number one. And then number two was just communication. I think with all the things that are going on out there, I think we really got to try to communicate. We've really trying to been pushing the website and having parents sign up to get alerts. So the more parents that sign up, we then would have the ability to send out individual team-specific announcements. So we're really trying to get parents to sign up for the alerts and the announcements on the website. There's a couple mobile apps here that we're using that we're trying to promote as well, just to get that information out. And then, of course, there's my Twitter account. So
Okay.
thanks.
All right, Bonnie.
Hi. So I'm Bonnie Violet, Director of Instructional Support, and I'm here to just review how we're doing in the Instructional Support Department. So you have a handout that you received as part of the board agenda, and I'm just going to highlight some of the things we're doing. So just yesterday, this is, hot off the press, we were audited by the Department of Education. Yesterday, yeah. So 3 people came to take a look at, basically how we're not just implementing special ed or instructional support, but how we're doing with documenting what we're, doing in terms of providing students with the support that they need. And they also, actually, we took them out to visit some of our schools and some of our classrooms, which was kind of nice. So I think some of you may remember that we were audited in 2015, and the 35 areas that they're looking at, and we're talking right now just like the paperwork process, we were cited as being out of compliance in 27 areas out of 35. So not that good. So yesterday, at the end of the day, we did an exit interview, and we were out of compliance in 2 areas out of 38. So that's pretty good. The 2 areas that showed up as out of compliance, so what the department is looking for is that we're at least at 95% compliance. So if we're at 95%, the other 5%, they look at as being like an individual issue with a student's paperwork. If it's more than 95% out of compliance, or less than 95%, I should say, they see it more as a systemic issue. And so for the 2 areas, they're basically the present levels that go into an IEP. And the present levels are based on the data from progress monitoring or from evaluations that we do. And we were out of compliance in the academic area as well as functional. Those are the 2 parts of the IEP where you put a student's present level. The academic was at an 88.6%, so we're pretty close to the 95. And the functional was at 86.5. Again, we're pretty close. So we're going to, by the end of the school year, we're going to remedy this so that we're at 100% compliance. So that'll be good. So only 2 areas this time. And so this means moving forward that our department really needs to look at our data more closely and to use the data to support formulating goals for IEPs and making sure that we're using, seems like it's right in my face. It is. Okay, thanks. That we're using IEP or data to really look more closely at student growth. So we just need to use our data a little more, we need to be more thoughtful about looking at our data and doing more analysis to make sure that students are making, progress. The other, so that kind of covers the first 2 on the handout that you have, compliance and academic instruction. Are there any questions about that? And then I'll move on to behavior.
Your microphone, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. Was this a planned audit or a surprise audit?
No, this was planned.
This was planned.
Yeah, this was planned. The department always gives you probably, I'd say 8 months notice. And so, we met with them like last June, and we went over what the audit requirements would be. And then we have to do like a desk audit or a self audit, and we send that along to them, and then they come to the district, and then they just randomly review files. And then whatever your self audit looks like hopefully matches what they find. Yeah, so we knew this ahead of time.
Was that the case when we were like 50% compliant? Did we know we were 50% compliant? Okay, 20 out of 40.
She wasn't here, so she doesn't know.
Well,
Well, I'm sure they-
they
yeah.
have the self audits in the file.
Oh, yeah.
So did they sort of align? Did we know we were like way off the mark?
You mean when we were audited in 2015?
Right, and they said, yeah.
Well, they would have given the district, my predecessor would have had some inkling that we were probably not 100% in compliance, I would think.
I'm just always curious when people do self-evaluations, like how far off the mark from reality was it?
Yeah. Well, that I'm not really sure because I don't know what their self-evaluation looks like.
Oh, okay, we didn't keep that.
I just know that when I saw the findings, which was like 3 years ago, we were out of compliance in a lot of areas. And what we've been working on as a department is to try to get us close, or as close as we could be, to 100%. And I was really aiming for 100%. So I was a little disappointed that we were 2 items off.
So I will add that all day I have been coaching Bonnie not to say we did pretty good. I said, to me we did exceptionally well. But, she really was aiming for 100. But I would say that that's a vast improvement in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of big on trends and things like that. Do you have numbers that show, percentage of students that had an IEP last year that, don't this year and those type things? Because I'm curious about, are we doing better because we're offering less and it's easier to, offer it to that smaller pool? And curious about that kind of trend. Do you have those numbers available?
Well, the only thing I can share with you tonight is our child count, which was, it's not that different. It's like, it was 261 last year, and it's 259 this year. However, that doesn't show, like, the students that exited out of special ed, because we do have some that exit out, and then we have students that are newly identified, and they enter special ed. So I'd have to look at our data, but we do have that data. So if you're interested in that, I can collect that for you.
Could you tell me those 2 numbers again? 261 this year and?
No, 259 this year.
259.
It was 261 last year.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not
pretty
that,
steady.
Yeah, it's pretty steady. Yeah. But that doesn't indicate the students that exited out.
And is that just for IEPs, or is that?
It is
what
just
is
for
that?
IEPs.
Okay.
Yeah. So this would be students that are determined to meet eligibility based on the criteria under the special ed regulations, and they have an individual educational program. So they're getting, specialized instruction.
And at what point does that student exit out?
Well, every 3 years, we evaluate students to see if they continue to meet eligibility. And so some students at that point would exit out. And then some students meet their IEP goals, and we may have them assessed, and if they don't meet the criteria, then they exit out. Yeah, so it could happen at any time in a child's school, K-12. Yeah.
Well, hopefully the trend is that they're more and more exiting out.
Hopefully. Yep. Any questions about compliance? Okay, so moving on to behavior. I just wanted to share that I think in my write-up I indicated that we have choices classrooms, which are classrooms really designed to provide a structured setting and behavioral interventions for students that really have difficulty emotionally in our schools. And this last year we provided a behavioral consultant to meet with our staff in Durham. And that program is very well structured, and the staff have learned how to use different strategies that have been really effective with our students. So that's been a real plus. This year, the behavior specialist has continued to consult in Durham, but is also consulting at Freeport Middle School because we have a program at Freeport Middle School. Just more recently, we've had a few little kindergartners coming into our district at Moore Street that also need behavioral intervention. So we have the behavior specialist actually consulting in that at that school as well. So our goal here is to really make sure that we're providing effective strategies so that our students can access their academic instruction. And so for some of our students that have difficulty emotionally, they need different types of support plans, and with the support plans they can learn, and they can learn very effectively. So moving forward, we're going to continue to have a specialist take a look at how we're managing student behaviors and that's really to make sure we're doing it as effectively as we possibly can. Any questions about that? Okay. And so the other part I just wanted to talk about is an initiative that we started last year at the high school. We're trying to do a lot more with our students being part of the general ed classroom, and some of our students at the high school have difficulty with reading or writing. And so last year, the integration specialist at the high school did a lot of providing professional development to our special ed staff so they could learn and teach our students how to use text-to-speech and speech-to-text, and also how to use some of the Google extensions that are part of, Google Classroom and, the Google apps. And it's been really tremendous for them because we have more students right now at the high school level that are mainstreamed in regular classes, and they're learning with their peers, and they're using technology to help understand what may be difficult for them in terms of reading or writing, or using read-write to summarize or highlight text. So it's been really nice to see, and the person at the high school is doing this now with other, regular ed teachers, and it's just been, helpful to our students to have that kind of, opportunity to be in regular classes. So we're trying to move away from small group instruction at the high school because, students feel, really different being singled out. And so that's, our goal moving forward is to continue to help teachers learn those strategies so they can continue to teach our students. So.
Is that a goal for the elementary grades too?
Well, at the elementary grades, we don't promote text-to-speech or speech-to-text.
No,
as
sorry, I
much.
mean inclusion in the regular classroom.
Oh, yes, inclusion, definitely. Yes, that's like district-wide. Yes, we are. What we're trying to do at the elementary level is to keep our students in general ed for the instructional time. And then if they need specialized instruction, we're very thoughtful about when they're removed from the classroom so they're not missing, the general ed instruction. It's always kind of a challenge because there's so many hours in the school day, and you're trying not to interfere in their learning in general ed, but provide what they need through special ed. Yeah, so it's a work in progress, but that's our goal.
Bonnie, could you actually go back to what you started to say about, I think you said speech to text in the elementary grades? I'd actually be interested to hear what you were going to say about that too.
Oh, sure. So we try not to use as much technology at the elementary level to accommodate, because we really want our students to practice their reading and to practice their writing. And when you start introducing like text-to-speech and speech-to-text, basically technology is doing it for them. And that's appropriate at the high school level, not as much at the elementary level, because we just want our students to learn how to read and write. And that's the time, K-5, when they should be doing that. We have some students that need technology, so I can't say we never do it. But we're not doing it as systemically as we are at the high school. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Anything else?
I had one question. I'm not sure if you were going to touch on it. The special education identification rate for us at 13.33 compared to the main DOE of 17.5. How should I read that number? What does that mean for us? Does that mean we're doing better than the average? Does it mean that maybe we're not identifying as frequently as others? If I did the math right, if we were at the state average, we'd have 81 more special ed students. Does that number fluctuate a lot?
So let me put this in perspective. So the national average is much higher, actually, or somewhat higher than that, I guess. And the state average they're trying to lower the state average because essentially, when you look at the number of, people, I guess, in society, there's usually a certain percentage that we would say, I mean, if you look at the bell curve, there's usually a percentage that, will struggle to learn or have disabilities. And so when we look at the average, the lower we can get it in terms of our district, as we're doing a better job educating our students, the lower that average is. And so, I guess the lower it is, the better we're doing. And so I think nationally and at the state level, we're all trying to get that average down.
Okay.
And so that's why we're looking as closely as we are at how we're providing instruction and what we're providing for instruction.
Yeah, I guess maybe my question tied to Jeremy's about, like, are we making sure that we are identifying everybody who needs services and not I mean, is the identification criteria consistent across schools and applied consistently across every school? So really it is an apples to apples, or is it how we see the identification process versus how they see the identification process?
You mean within our own schools?
Like
Here?
us compared to other schools in Maine?
Well, I know we're applying it consistently within the schools in Maine. I'd have to do some research to really compare our percentage of identification to our neighboring districts, but it is going to vary.
Does ours vary a lot? I mean, it doesn't seem like it, 259 to 261.
It doesn't vary that much. Because really, if you look at an average of 17% for the state, there will be a number of students that are way below that, like we're 13.
Mm-hmm.
But there will also be a number of districts that are higher, because that's how you come up with an average. And so I can't tell you like which districts are high and which are low. And if that's, I can get that data.
No,
That's on the
I don't think
DOE
it's necessary.
website,
I guess my
probably.
point was just to make sure that we are, our goal is to make sure that all of our kids can access their education, and not identifying kids that could use services doesn't serve that purpose. So just making sure that we are identifying kids that need it. And if you tell me we are, then that's great.
And I would say we are, because we have like a process at each of our schools, especially at the elementary, it's very solid, where if a teacher has a concern about a student, there's a process they go through where, they meet during their PLCs and they put some interventions in place. Every school has a student assistance team, and, it's a group of, teachers in the school, or sometimes with the guidance counselor or social worker, that will brainstorm a plan for a student. And so I feel confident that we don't have students falling through the cracks. And out of that, out of the SAT is when they decide at the building level that if a student's not making adequate progress after these different interventions are tried in the classroom, and, with, some of our, like reading math interventionists, then they will refer to special ed and we will do testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
You made up Craig's 3 minutes. Nice work. Okay, so 7, policy review. We have 2 policies for first read and 2 policies for second read, and final approval on the slate for this evening. And I think, Cynthia?
I'm going to
Oh, you're
speak
gonna-
first to
okay.
the first reads, and also just bring up with the board in our discussion on a way to become more efficient, is if we could all agree that if there are like grammatical kind of wordsmithing errors in the policies, if we could just send those to Cynthia and she will make the changes to the policy without it coming for a board vote. Obviously, if it changes the content or the meaning in any way, we would bring those policies to the vote, those policies to the board for a vote. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll kind of move forward with that, and we won't get into wordsmithing at our board meetings. The first 2 policies that are here for the first read, really it's just for those 2 policies to become more consistent, and it just talks about electing committee members, and that's something that we've been doing, and so we're just changing the wording on that to reflect that and to be consistent throughout the policies. So that's all we need on that one tonight, unless you have specific questions for Cynthia on it.
My only question was, it says to remove the chair or vice chair, you need a super majority vote. Just curious what that was. I'm just kidding. Sort of, you know.
You're getting punchy.
So we need a motion. If nobody has questions, we need a motion for to accept the first read. Jen and Sarah. Any other questions? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.
So on the next two policies before you, I do want Cynthia to speak to the first one, which is the staff conduct with students. On this whole section of the policy review, we did set aside 20 minutes, and I expect that most of the discussion will come in on these two policies.
Good evening. So this came to you probably 2 months back, I think, this policy originally. So it went to first read, and then in between time, we've had some extra meetings with teachers and administrators, probably 3, 4, 5 meetings, and looked at several of the bullets. Well, there were 4 bullets, and I think I explained those to you at that time, which ones we were looking at. And then we went back to policy committee in between to make some more revisions. So item D, or letter D, under the unacceptable conduct heading, all we did there was change. It's really essentially changing none of the content in D. It's starting with that parallel language prompting student, and then we took that last sentence and reworked it into the body of it. So there's nothing essentially changed with the content in that particular letter. Letter G was J, was I think at the policy committee level we talked about, quite at length. No matter which group we talked to in the process, everybody had a different opinion. So the policy committee felt that this would be the one item that we wanted to put out to the board to have the board discuss. So how it's presented to you today is permitting students to address you in an overly familiar manner. So that was the change that was brought to policy committee. And we couldn't come to a really, a good consensus about that when we're talking about your first name, nickname, or otherwise. So we thought we would put that out for discussion. We talked about things like, is calling somebody Mrs. A, okay, acceptable, or Mrs. Cynthia, which are both acceptable, is one or the other acceptable, for example. So there was a lot of discussion on that. Is that too familiar? Is a nickname too familiar? So we put that out for discussion with the recommendation from the policy committee. What is the will of the board on that?
Maddie?
Are we discussing now? Is this?
I think that's what she wants us to do.
Yeah, this is the one item that the
So this is the recommendation of the policy committee?
The policy committee recommended.
What's the current policy say?
So no, it was not. The current policy has what you see there in full.
So without the strikeout?
Yes.
So right now, they cannot call somebody by their
This
first name?
isn't the recommendation of the policy committee, though.
Right.
This is what was brought to the policy committee, recommended change.
And the recommendation of the policy committee is to bring this one to the board to discuss.
Okay.
Just this letter.
Yeah.
Jay.
So I wrote good underneath it. I like this with the language struck out. There are nicknames that teachers have had for many, many years, often coaches, sometimes not coaches. And I think for us to legislate what overly familiar is, I don't think that's legislatable. I think there's a yeah, I mean, what does overly familiar is in? It's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's like if it feels off. So how do we say that no one can ever have a nickname? I don't agree with that, because I know many of our teachers have nicknames and have had them for many years, and I don't find it inappropriate.
Naomi?
So my hesitation with changing it is the fact that there are a lot of teachers that have nicknames or go by or called first names, and we've had it in policy that they're not supposed to. And so changing the policy to fit what our practice has been, which has been against the policy, I think we're relaxing it instead of just enforcing what we've had. I think overly familiar manner is very subjective, like you said. And so I just think it makes it more subjective and more wishy-washy, in my opinion, which is why I wanted it left as is.
Jen?
I look at the policy to be as vague is not the right word, but to be as limited, just because I think when you need policy, you need it to be a little bit more open to be able to not fit the situation. But if you're only putting first name, nickname, or otherwise over, you're being very specific. Whereas I think if you just say overly familiar, you do leave it open. But I think that's actually a good thing.
Kate?
I disagree because how do you then enforce this in an equal manner across all of the schools? So like if in one school it's okay to say Mrs. P, but in another it's not, how do you ever make sure that the policy is being applied equally in the same manner?
I mean, wouldn't it be in that scenario, wouldn't it be the discretion of the teacher? Like, no, I want to be called Mrs. Richardson. Don't call me Mrs. R. That's not who I am. Whereas, I mean, I think it would be at the teacher's discretion for something like that. But if it's a completely inappropriate nickname, I think this allows us the flexibility to limit that.
But I'm sorry. But do we want teachers to be able to tell certain teachers might have different views? Do we want students to be calling teachers by their first name? Do we want that kind of familiarity? Because if we're leaving it up to individual teachers, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I like them. They're in a position of authority, and I think if they're on a first name basis, it's a little different than coaches. I think I don't know. I don't know that we should leave it up to maybe building administrators, having their own building rules, but then how are you
get back
applying
to
it across?
Kate's point, right?
Right.
Sarah?
And this is a policy for teachers. So to leave it up to them to decide whether, I think we're trying to create a policy for teachers. Right.
So how do people define nicknames? Say, for someone to be called Ms. Z, which we know there is a Ms. Z at Maslany School, would that be a nickname?
I would say that is a nickname.
Have there been any problems with nicknames? Are we trying to solve a problem here by changing it?
Well,
I haven't seen any problems at Maslany, and there are a lot of nicknames.
I think the first name is more different than
Right. Carter?
So I agree with Naomi. I've actually been present in classes where some of my fellow classmates have referred to our teacher with their first name, and I feel like when you're in that kind of an environment, it takes away different levels of respect, especially if it's their first name, and it kind of affects your learning because you don't really take the class nearly as seriously. Really? And I feel if you show the teacher more of a distinct level of respect by using their full name, like Mrs. whatever their last name is, or what names they've laid out for you at the beginning of when I was a freshman, I had a couple of teachers who told us what names were acceptable to call them, if it was just like Mr. G or Mr. something like that. I feel like it should be to the discretion of the teacher, but it should not be their first name.
So would that be a compromise that we could put in there, that we can strike nickname or otherwise, but
Strike first name, but leave the nickname as appropriate.
No, we want to keep, because right now this is saying, so right now you cannot, we want to say permitting students to address you by your first name or in an overly familiar manner. All right. Have what you need, Cynthia?
I do. So what I have is, it's going to read, permitting students to address you by your first name or in an overly familiar manner. Great.
So really, we're just removing the nickname piece of it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And I guess the other thing to note is we put a note at the bottom in between. So that's underlined and it's right above reporting violations. And we wordsmith this, I think, 3 to 4 times, and we involved the representative for the teachers in this process. So we think we have it right at this point. That's why we're bringing it to you, because we recognize that, you know, you might have a neighbor you've grown up with, and there's reason that, you know, you have friends and you've been involved together for a long time, and then you might end up having that person as a teacher later on. And so it's just recognizing those situations, but that we're not responsible for those situations. So, and then that they should not violate the spirit of the policy. That was the language that we finally settled on at the end that made it feel right. And there's no other than that, the other changes we have talked about in the previous presentation.
Is the social media on here?
Yes, so it is, I think N, maintaining personal contact with a student outside of school by phone, email, text, instant messenger, internet chat room, social networking websites.
Perfect.
We added text to that, remember, from the first time.
Anybody have a comment on this one, or do we want to have her move to the second one?
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to turn this over to, or I'm going to invite up Dave Watts, who's turning around. For the facilities, community use of facilities. And I don't believe we had any changes from first read. We didn't. We did. Which ones do we have from first read?
Administrative procedure.
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah.
So, all right, so on the very, page 1, that's third paragraph, you'll see the change. That was a recommended change, that's right. Okay, so I'll let you.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, this is good because I don't have that one. That's great, thanks. Hi.
Hello. So that was the only change from the first one to now?
Correct.
I think you'd added the as deemed necessary under the electrical equipment.
Yes, we did as deemed necessary, and down under 1F, considered district-based, not town-based. Yeah, so there was some cleaning up.
All right.
May I suggest another edit?
Sure.
Under 2A. No, sorry. Which one is it? 1F. Where it defines RSU number 5 based nonprofit organizations, that we say such groups are considered district-based if greater than 75% of members, comma, or participants in its RSU 5 based program, comma, are RSU 5 residents. And I understand that the issue with the Girls on the Run has been resolved, but the original confusion came because this is not very clear. So I would like to make sure that if somebody else has your post and they're not aware that members could also mean participants in the local program, that it's spelled out clearly so that everybody knows that
Yeah, see,
they are nonprofits.
I actually, this is consistent with our neighboring and other schools, and I actually would suggest that we do not open it up to be for nonprofits. That means that any non-local group could come in and be considered a local group. and charge our students anything they want and not pay for the use of being in our facilities. So I think it's by having members, it's specifically talking about the members of the organization itself, as opposed to, any you can form a nonprofit for whatever thing you want these days. That doesn't mean that nobody's making money. That just means that you aren't showing a profit. That means that any money that you do make is passed back to the person who's overseeing it, who might not live in this town, or any of the members. It could come from out of state. I think by leaving it like this, the way things were presented from Girls on the Run was that it was being presented as a state group, and it was being run by a state group. They are charging $145 per student for the program. There was no indication whatsoever on the application that it was being run by a local group of volunteers. So I only found that out by contacting all the other schools around us to say, you have the same policy we do. How are you getting the rest? Oh, well, they have, it's their teachers, it's their parents who volunteer to come in and run this program locally. Okay, that makes sense to me, but that's not the members of the organization that are running it. It's the people, it's the local group. If we compare it to, they said that they wanted to compare it to the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. When we have an application for the Girl Scouts to meet, well, first of all, no den mother is being paid. Nobody is being paid to come and meet in those in the school. Second of all, when our application process, we get the application from the local den. We don't get it from the state. However, we do host in RSU5 schools events that are put on by the Boy Scouts, by the state groups, and even though the majority or whatever number we have to go, then we have to start looking at who's actually going to these events. They pay rent because it's the state. They're still a nonprofit, but they're a non-local nonprofit. So I would hesitate to change the wording on this because it would then allow anybody to come in, no matter whether they are local based, no matter whether people are volunteering, no matter whether there are local people running it. And I think that would be against the spirit of the policy.
So your reading of the policy now, sorry. People keep turning around, it must be the speakers. Your reading of the policy now, when you say members, is, if it's being facilitated and supported and volunteered by local people, right? Like this one is, the coaches, the mentors, all of that.
Correct.
Then they would qualify as a RSU5 based nonprofit.
Correct. And the application that came in, it came in from a Portland group.
Yeah.
That it wasn't, the way it was run was not made known to us.
Yeah.
So Becky and I sat down and we made the determination based off of policy, which I think we can still make that determination off of policy, and it fits within the policy. But I'd hate to open it up and then have something come in that we don't want to have happen.
Right. Okay.
So
that would be my recommendation.
May I? So in 5C, you do have description of the waivers that are granted, but it doesn't say that you can grant a waiver if it's run by local people. It says that you can grant a waiver if they're led by RSU 5 staff, but not by local volunteers.
That is a specific waiver. Yeah, that's a specific thing. That has nothing to do with this isn't a waiver.
Okay.
So
I'm
it's- we're
confused
not
because when I
waiving
read this policy, I don't know where that group fits in.
They are, well, and that's where it comes into, they would be a local nonprofit who is running the group.
When I read your description, and it says, meaning not your description, sorry, the current policy, when I read the current policy,
Yeah, it's my description. I wrote it.
when I read your description then, it says members, and members, I read as members of the entire organization for the whole state, in which case 75% of members for a lot of groups that operate locally would disqualify them from being considered local nonprofits.
And I think that the way, again, if they would be running a program and running it out of, and they're paying their instructors to come from Saco, and or they're hiring an instructor to come from Saco, and it's being managed out of Portland, and they're coming in and they have 5 instructors, and they go throughout the state, regardless if they have 100% involvement, because this is what they do. They set up these programs, and that's how they make their money. Instead of owning facilities, they will go and run these businesses in the schools, and then not have the overhead, and then want to just have it for free. To me, that is a non-local, whether it's profit or non-profit, but it is non-local. The way I understand this specific group that we're talking about running is not that. They don't have 5 instructors across the state that go to every school. It's kind of like, although it's not, but it's kind of like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, where they have a local group that actually runs the program. And so each of those local groups run it. And so to me, that's exactly this. So the members of that local group are running the program.
So the current reading of it provides you with that discretion to make that distinction.
Correct.
Which I think is a good thing.
I think if we overly define too much, then I'm out there collecting, okay, let me see your driver's license, or
yeah.
But I felt comfortable. I actually liked the process. I felt like it worked, because it gave us the opportunity to first, okay, well, here's what you're giving us, and this is what we see. But then it came, well, I don't want to pay that. I shouldn't have to pay that. Well, then, it's like, but why? Well, I'm not paying it here. I'm not paying it here. I'm not paying it anywhere else. So then, this is how we network with all the other schools and find out, so what's actually going on. And it was just a matter of that we didn't have the information. That's all it was. But once we got the information, it was clear that we could make that determination that it was within the policy the way it's written.
So if the policy works the way it's written, may I suggest that the application include that information that is relevant in terms of who is running the program? Because if the application that we provide to them doesn't ask them for that information, and we say you don't qualify, they may fight back, but they may not, and they may just go away, and our kids miss out on great programs.
Well, see, here's the thing. The person who's running this one locally also happens to be the executive director. That doesn't 99.9% of the time happen. So I'm saying, I even said that to her. I said, so I need the person who's going to be, that should be the name on the application, because your name is, it actually says that. Who's the local contact? Not who's overseeing the organization, but who's the local contact. So it just so happened that this one was a little bit off. I don't see that this is anything. I don't see it's systemic at all. Yeah, I think this was just we didn't have the information, and it was weird because the ED lives in Freeport. The ED is the one that's volunteering to run the program. The kids are in the school. If this were in another school district, it would be, that's why it was so simple when I called Falmouth and I said, how do you get, oh, well, that's easy. Our teachers it was actually the teachers in the school that were running it. I'm like, oh, okay.
We're just going over our time, so.
We're over our time?
We are. We are at 24 minutes.
Tell us that?
I'm telling you now.
Oh, you're telling us now. I'm sorry. I thought I missed it.
Okay, I would like to suggest this is for a vote, so we can give ourselves a few more minutes.
You can suggest that, yes. So, do people have questions for David? Okay. Do you have a question?
I have one more.
Okay.
For David.
Yeah.
2A, where it says that use of the facilities beyond the end of the day shall be at the sole discretion of RSU 5, number 5, RSU 5 community programs in conjunction with the superintendent.
Correct.
I'm concerned with leaving the building administrators out. So I would like to suggest that we say in conjunction with the building administrators and the superintendent. They're the ones who know best what happens in their buildings, and they have very good reasons to be included in that decision-making process. And I believe they are anyhow, so.
They're actually not, and they actually don't know most of what goes on after school. And that's because even when they have something that goes on after school, they have to get it to us. So community programs actually is the only place that once the end of the school, that's nothing new. That's actually been there since before I came here.
So what I'm referring to is if you have to define the priority for all these different groups and who gets first dibs on this space, do you consult with the building administrator?
No, and there is no priority. We don't have that.
I understand these are not in priority. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. Who makes the decision on who gets to use a space first if there is a conflict? How do you decide whether
If
it's
there's
going to
a
be the
conflict?
boosters or the community programs or some outside
Is it
group?
first come, first served, whoever books it first?
It is. Yep.
So it may be that some group from a regional group may be bumping out the boosters?
They would not be bumping them out.
If they apply first.
If they apply first, yes.
Do we want it to be that way?
I think so. But we've had it the opposite way a couple times in the past, which has been a problem where we have community groups that will be they'll be in something that they've been doing for 10, 15, 20 years. They've been doing something, and because we have a first-year administrator coming in, doesn't know anything about the history, but says, I want to have I'm going to schedule a professional development morning on that Saturday, and they have to be kicked out. I think that creates a lot of ill will, and would, I think there are conflicts, but we've run this completely by all of the administrators for 2 years, and I don't think that anybody. Number one, I don't think anybody wants to be bothered of me getting in touch with them we have hundreds and hundreds of building use applications. So I think all we ever do is when there's a conflict. And if it's a conflict, then I go to Becky and then we deal with the conflict that way, as opposed, honestly, the administrators are really, they call me and say, can I have my library this afternoon? And I'm like, absolutely, go for it. Most of the time, there's never a conflict. But really, they do understand that they don't know what's going on in their buildings because there's so much going on.
Other questions?
I just feel like I need to be clear on this because we're getting so much communication about it. So, do the Boy Scouts get charged
The local group does not.
Does not get charged. So
No, only if they're using it on a weekend. If it results, anybody that uses something beyond any non-school group, be it boosters, be it the towns, be it nonprofits, be it anything that is not a school program, the only thing that they're charged for is and I'm saying local nonprofit,
Yeah.
is excess custodial fees. That's it.
Oh, okay. All right.
There is no rental. But if the Boy Scouts, like we have a big event that they pay about $1,700 a year, somewhere around that, I can't remember what the number is exactly, but where the entire high school is used for a day, and that by the Boy Scouts.
From all over the state, and they do pay
From
for
all
that.
over the state. We are the host of the University of Scouting, and we have been for several years now.
Okay, and then like an organization like Mad Science, they
They're-
pay to use it
That's
Yes.
their program.
Yes,
right?
they do.
because
They
they're
pay through
a
us.
national nonprofit.
They have local. When I say local, I'm sorry, they have, like we hire, community programs hires Mad Science of Portland. And so the Mad Science of the Greater Portland area comes in through community programs. And yes, through that they do pay. Everybody pays a percentage.
Okay, I mean, I do have a problem with how this language is written in 1F, because if one day you, David, don't have this job, I feel like for outside people who are reading this, greater than 75% of members, as it's written, does refer to the membership of the nonprofit organization, the national nonprofit organization or state or whatever, non-local. So I hear that the problem has been solved. That's what I'm hearing now. Actually, this is the first I'm hearing it, that the Girls on the Run, that issue that has been solved. But as this policy is written, I think it's totally confusing. So I would advocate for fixing the language so that it says what we want it to say. And we could do that on another round, or maybe you guys just all disagree with me. But I mean, when you read district-based if greater than 75% of members are RSU 5 residents, that doesn't qualify for the Boy Scouts. That doesn't qualify for Girls on the Run, because those are national organizations with hundreds of thousands of members.
Well, the Boy Scouts, I mean, it's Den 27.
Correct.
It's Girl Scout Troop 601. I mean,
Correct.
they're the ones renting the space, and they are
Correct.
local. I mean, they're
Okay.
local
Yeah.
to each area.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
I think they firmly fit in the community base.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
they charge nothing. Kids don't pay to
Yes,
go
they
to
do.
this. There's a membership fee.
Oh, right.
That's $25 a year.
Not for Boy
membership
Scouts.
fees. Oh, I'm talking about. I was only asked Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts are $25 a year for a
I
membership.
think it's a little bit more than that, but
But none of that money goes to the local den.
right.
Can we
So-
call the question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So we typically vote on them together. I'm hearing some discussion on the second one that perhaps we don't want to vote on them together. Let's do a vote for the first, the student conduct, staff conduct with students. Do we have a motion to move that for second read? Second, what?
I know. It is second read.
Right, for the second read, right? Sorry. Final vote on that one. So Maddie and Jen, all those in favor? Opposed? No? Okay. So do we have a motion for second read of the community use of school facilities? Jen and Naomi?
Wait, do you mean final? This is the final?
Yes, second is final.
Okay. Just when you say for the second read, it sounds like you would like to have a second read. That's why it's confusing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, it's.
Last vote.
Last vote.
For community, so Jen and Naomi, all those in favor? Opposed? And Nate? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay, so policy done, A and B. So 8A for the workshop, we've already done that. We moved that up to the top. B is the revised superintendent evaluation tool. So green packet in your folder. Do you want to do a quick overview?
Sure. I think the subcommittee of the board's been working on this. I don't know, we've met 4 times maybe. That's Valley and Sarah and Lindsay and Michelle. And so I think we have a tool that we all feel like is a much better evaluation tool than the previous one. And so that's what we're presenting to you tonight. There's been some adjustments on the timeline. Of course, the goal is to have it, the superintendent evaluation totally finished by June 30th. And I think there are 2 major changes here that we're presenting for your consideration. One is it's really much more kind of standards-based with rubrics that we think are fairly clear. And then the other piece is that there will be administrator input for your consideration. So each of the administrators, I think there's 17 of them, not counting myself, will be completing an evaluation that's in here for you to look at. And they will be sending that in. It will not be anonymous. They'll have to put their name to it. It will not be anything that I will see. It's just you. I want to remind you that it's the board that evaluates the superintendent, not the other administrators. But part of the feedback that we received, that there were some areas that it was really hard for you to evaluate because you didn't see those. So it was a lot of kind of don't know. So we hope that by the administrators weighing in, that will help guide your evaluation. So you will see, Cynthia, Michelle will complete one. You'll see their name. You'll see the rating that they give me in each of those areas. I will not see any of that. The only thing that I will see is what you kind of gave me last year, which is the overall evaluation.
Vicki, I would like to clarify the way I understand it is that they do put their names on it, so it's not anonymous, but it is confidential.
Yes.
And the information that comes to the board is aggregated with all the responses from all the administrators, so we as a board don't get to see individual responses with their names attached. So the way I understand it, the only person who actually gets to see each individual response with the names of the administrators would be Ginny or Human Resources or the person aggregating the data, but that we wouldn't see individual responses. So it would be confidential.
There was just, I'm trying to remember, because we went round and round on this whole anonymous versus, not anonymous feedback.
Do you want my memory of it?
Yes, I'd like your memory of it.
My memory of it was that the board members would see the names, but we would take all the information with great care and confidence and avoid, whenever possible, transmitting the names in whatever final evaluation. They would only be used to follow up if something was unclear, or if there was an occasion that some feedback component did make it into the did sort of escalate, so we needed to really understand more details about a situation. That would allow the
Follow
board
up,
to kind of follow up, to get clarity on a situation, but no names would be put in.
Right, so she wouldn't see those, she wouldn't see the evaluations from the administrators, and she wouldn't see the, the specific comments. It would be sort of
And that would
global.
be the aggregate.
Right.
Is what you would see.
She wouldn't even see their aggregate.
She would only see.
Not by name, I mean all of the
No,
data.
she wouldn't even see the surveys. So the board uses the information from the administrator surveys to come up with its own evaluation of the superintendent. And whatever is given to the superintendent is in the board's own language and format and terms.
Right.
It's a final,
Right.
and it has.
So it's to help us make our evaluation. Jen?
It says right here that responses will be shared with the board of directors and will be kept confidential.
Right.
I mean, I feel like if they put their name on it, that's very clear that
Yeah.
it will be kept confidential, but will be shared with
the board. So I just want to bring people's attention to the front page, which is the timeline. We've also spent some time working on that. So you'll see when sort of the process gets rolling, and you'll also see in there, when we do our evaluation is after we've seen the administrators' responses, right? Because that's what they're there for, is to help us evaluate Becky or the superintendent. I also point out that, we'll now be looking at 9 standards instead of, 87 individual questions that we had to provide scores for. So you're welcome for that. But you may recall when Ed went over sort of superintendent evaluations with us a couple of years ago. This may look familiar because this was one that some national groups had put some good time and effort into. But we did go through each of these standards and each of these rubrics to make sure it applied and said what we wanted it to say, to capture what we are looking for information. And then the administrator evaluation, we didn't feel like it made sense for them to complete the same things we were, so we tried to make theirs very specific to their, to their interactions and their experiences with the superintendent. So, we'd love folks' feedback. Our plan, if people are comfortable with this, is, we would start using this year. Yes.
I have some thoughts about specific things in here. Is that what you're wanting, or do you just want a general feedback?
Let's start with general feedback. You don't have any general feedback?
I think it's great. There are some specific things that I have questions about. You've already answered a lot of my questions.
Okay.
Generally, I think it's great. I love that it's standards-based.
We really did try to align it with what we're doing with the teachers, right?
Great.
So the titles for the different areas are the same. So for some consistency of, even just for a teacher's perspective, hey, my boss or my boss's boss is being evaluated in the same way I am, which we thought was fair. If people don't have general, then shoot on the specifics.
Okay, thank you. On the first one, visionary leadership, I'm in the definition, the end of that definition says shared and supported by all. Doesn't that seem ridiculous and unattainable?
It's the standard. It's what we're striving for.
That's like a 4+. Can't we say the majority or
by
something
most?
like that? Leadership by its definition is consensus doesn't happen. If you're a leader, there are going to be some rumblings. So I don't know.
We always should have a path.
Yeah, and I think if you read the 4, the highly effective in the rubric, I'm not sure anywhere in there we say that.
No, in the 3 it says all stakeholders. In the 3.
Does it?
Second.
Yes.
Yeah. So
works to create alignment, designed to enroll all stakeholders in the vision.
All right.
Right.
I guess designed to enroll all stakeholders.
Right. Her job is to try and get everybody on board.
That's her vision. It's the vision.
It's the vision. Okay. I can live with that. Standard 3. I just have a question about under highly effective. the last paragraph, proactively and frequently gives a positive voice to the district through the media. First of all, that's weird sentence construction, but I don't love the word positive because I think that can be construed as sometimes maybe disingenuous. So could we choose a better word like genuine, encouraging, promising, optimistic? That's, do you see? I mean, I know
I like genuine. I think optimistic actually is even, in my mind, even worse.
That could be worse
than positive.
Yeah. Right. We'll get there. But that's my feedback.
I don't know. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I do think it's important to. I mean, there's a difference between putting the district in its best light and using a positive voice and having. Putting the district in its best light. I mean, and lying about things that are good that are not good. I mean, I could see a leader that I'm not psyched about being kind of unnecessarily downer about things or making reasonable situations seem worse than they are. You do want to be careful with public perception, and
definitely,
I don't want someone lying to the public by any means. But there's no. It's a tough communications job, and I would want the person in that job to be putting the district in its best light whenever possible.
I guess my favorite alternate words that I suggested are encouraging or promising.
Gives a promising voice to the district?
Or an encouraging outlook. I don't like that sentence. First of all, I just don't like how it's written. It just, positive voice to, it's a weird sentence.
Is it by a positive voice to the district, meaning that when you're out, you're representing.
There you go, representing the district in a
district.
positive light. That I could live with.
So sometimes when we're working on rubrics, it's good to go back to the 3, and it could be we could just use that language. So a 3 is consistently shares information with media that puts district in the best light. But we could also just add proactively.
Yes.
Proactively and consistently shares information with media that puts district in the best light. And I think then you have more parallel structure. And I think it's getting to what all of you are saying.
Agreed.
Okay.
I think I only have one more. In Standard 7, reading the performance indicators, if you look at bullet number 2 and bullet number 3, bullet number 2 seems to be about recruitment and hiring, and bullet number 3 seems to be about the dismissal, but there's no bullet that refers to evaluation. So I feel like that's missing and important.
It's actually bullet number 1, demonstrates use of system and staff evaluation data.
Oh, good. I just missed it. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Perfect.
I think on that one we did separate it out. I think there was quite a bit of discussion. Right?
Yep. Yes, Kate.
We can just go back, sorry, to Standard 3 again. Are we adding proactively and frequently to that final bullet from number 3 to develop number 4?
So, proactively and frequently shares information with the media. So basically, it proactively and frequently replaces consistently.
Yes. I thought I had only heard adding proactively, so I just wanted to double check that frequently should be in there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the tool? Perfect. So we have it on here. So this is a first read, because this is a policy.
Yep.
So slightly not with the other policy reviews, but consideration and approval for policy CBI, evaluation of the superintendent of schools for the first read. So it will come back for a second read, which will be its final read. And, but if we can move the first read. Kate, second from Valley. All those in favor? Great. Thank you to everybody who's been on this committee. It's been a lot of work, but I think the board as a whole, I hope, will be will be more pleased with the results that we get and provide us with information that helps us inform our decision. Okay. Look at that. We've derailed at this point in the past, so. You totally did. Okay, so 8C, request from the Brunswick School Department regarding consolidation of services in your packets. And this was actually in your packets last month. I think we had gotten it just prior to the meeting, so it wasn't in your original packets, but Ginny had stuck it in everybody's folder, but we didn't obviously get a chance to read it or speak about it. So basically, it's a letter from the superintendent of the Brunswick schools suggesting that they are open to discussions about any consolidation or sharing of services. And when we got this, I reached out to the board chair in Brunswick just to, touch base with her. And my understanding is they sent this letter out to pretty much anybody who's contiguous or close to them in any way, in an effort to try and see if there's interest, either individually or collectively as, a variety of districts to look at ways that we could share some services. My guess is this is stemming out of the governor's regionalization goal of not necessarily consolidating districts, but potentially sharing of services. So, she said they were very early stage. They'd sent it out to a lot of people, and we're sort of waiting for feedback back from folks. But we wanted to share it with our board to see if there was. I'm certainly happy to reach back out to her, as will Becky with Paul, to provide the sentiment of the board, if you have one. Okay.
I'm certainly not against any sort of collaboration, but not district reorganization. I would not entertain that at all, given the growing pains that RSU5 has gone through and the point that we're at now. I feel like we're really good in a good spot. So I would not entertain that idea, but any other sort of, I don't want to shut the door completely to any sort of collaborative effort between the two districts.
I read that sentence 4 times. I'm like, did they say that?
Yeah, right? For real?
Yeah,
I wrote absolutely not next to the consolidation.
Candy.
I just wondered if you had any kind of sense of some things they might be interested in sharing.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think they're pretty open to sharing anything, and we did at the last minute put in this proposal to meet the, I forget, was that November 1st deadline or November 30th or whatever, and said we might, collaborate with them and talk some around subbing, right, and doing sub fairs around professional development. So I think they're really open to listening to anything. And I'm really pleased to hear that it doesn't look like we want to go through a total reorganization. So I'm thrilled to hear that coming through. But likewise, I think it never hurts to explore other areas that could be some cost sharing or even, just great learning from one another.
Right. When I went to the regionalization one of the seminars at the annual conference in the fall, some of the things they talked about where districts might be, collaborating was summer school programs, right? It's usually not a huge number of kids that are doing it, but you're paying for teachers. Everybody's paying for teachers. Is there a way we could, consolidate those into one program for the area? Obviously Region 10 is a great example of us already collaborating with those two districts. So, just keeping an eye out for other things we could do together. Sarah, sorry.
In your discussion with them, are they open to reorganization?
That's what the letter says.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't really talk about that with her on my side, but, we were just talking a little bit more generally, and, I was curious on where they had sent this. Was it just to us? It wasn't, but, So is the sentiment I'm hearing that, we're certainly open to, potential collaborations, at this point, not interested in the reorganization option? Yeah? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so D, RSU 5 cost sharing formula. So Bill Stockmeyer was at our last meeting back in December last year. He provided a lot of information in his presentation, and then he has followed up with a couple more, with one email immediately following, and then some additional clarifying information in the last week or so. I think a lot of us needed some time to absorb everything he provided, give it some thought, and so the reason we brought it back for discussion this evening was really to see if there was feeling from the board that this is something we want to look at investigating further a change to the current cost sharing formula. So we put it on the discussion to just really talk about, do we want to open it, or are we comfortable with what it is? Naomi?
I'm all for exploring it and seeing if there's inequity and, kind of what was spoken about during public comment. I'm not sure I like the wording that we have here, consideration approval to change it. That kind of puts us in a box. I think maybe explore it or take a look at it, review, evaluate something different than that word.
No, that's a good point. Well, we haven't made a motion yet, so I haven't asked for a motion for that yet. So if that's what we all feel, we can certainly make that change, and Cynthia will write it down, I'm sure.
Review the tape in case.
Yeah.
I guess my sentiments are really kind of echoed by Kevin Netto's comments earlier, in that, on the one hand, things change and we should make sure that we are keeping our awareness on whether or not things are staying fair. But on the other hand, determining what's fair strikes me as pretty difficult to do for all three communities to end up feeling like whatever ingenious solution we come up with is fair. I mean, I'm struggling to imagine a process that would not tear our great unified district into pieces again. And from what I digested from the presentation, while there are some things that strike me as not ideal, is it currently unfair? I wouldn't choose that language. I mean, there are different ways of looking at each. There's just different perspectives and different lenses, and sometimes it looks fair and other times it looks a little off balance. But I don't know that we could come up with a solution that would be more universally recognized as fair.
It's been on, sorry. I would agree with Lindsay 100%. You're never going to get ever any larger than 3 people to agree on what's fair. I felt like from what he presented, I didn't feel like there was any humongous difference between everything he put out. So, if you switch it to, the pupil count, like I didn't feel like there was any glaring issue that was worth opening the can of worms that it would open. That's just.
keep going back and forth between calling it a can of worms and Pandora's box. Kate.
I would support exploring a change to the formula because I felt the information that Bill presented, every single scenario showed Pownell kind of, I think that was the glaring issue I saw, was that in every snow he showed, Pownell was paying more than what the other scenarios would, under the other scenarios, what we would be paying. So I think while it's, you know, I don't think because it's a difficult task to try to find a fair cost-sharing formula is a reason not to explore it, because I think there's a lot of people who think the existing formula isn't fair either. And I think you see it every time Pownell votes down the school budget or Durham votes down the school budget. People know and feel like there's something wrong inherently with that cost-sharing formula, and I think it's our duty to look back at it take a hard look, take the time to have a committee thoroughly vet it, because when that cost-sharing formula was set up, it was at least in the material that Bill presented to us, it was meant to be temporary. It was meant to ease us into being a district of 3 towns, and I think it's our duty to explore alternatives.
Maddie.
Just given that we had 2 town councils represented in this meeting asking us to look at it, I think it's a good faith gesture that we look at it, and I agree with Naomi's language suggestion. We don't necessarily commit to changing it, but we commit to taking a look at it and agree. This is definitely not my area of expertise. It doesn't sound fun. I know we risk opening up old wounds, but I think we owe it to our constituents to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally, the ideal scenario is we as a board can, have this discussion. I think Kate's point is that of it going to a committee for review, I think that makes sense. And they, I would envision this falls in the finance committee's realm. And they would come back with some potentials, some alternatives, some pros and cons of the variety, and then leave it to the board to make that decision on whether it's worth changing and to what, if so. Where I see this potentially going, getting painful in the communities is if it goes to referendum vote, because we all struggle to really understand the ED 279 and all of the data, and it would be a monumental education process, I think, to do that in the communities. I mean, we'll do it if we have to, but I think the ideal scenario is, we view it as a board, and hopefully we can come to some consensus of what is fair. So,
Michelle?
Yeah, Chair.
I just think that we should keep in mind that our number one edict there on our, what do we call it here?
Protocol.
Our protocol is that the children's interests come first, and in looking at the numbers really are so small in terms of the differences that these different scenarios would play out, and I think it would be a disservice to the kids to look at this, because it would take our attention away from curriculum and things that are more important than this, in my estimation.
Okay.
I would caution against looking at the numbers and calling it small, because Pownell is pretty small. We have maybe 800 households. I don't know how many taxpayers we have, but a 2% difference, it's a substantial impact in Pownell. So.
Other thoughts? Okay. So we put the vote on here if we wanted to do it. I'm getting the sense that people would like to have a vote on whether we want to open this up or not. So if someone wanted to make a motion, I'll let them word it so that Cynthia can write it down.
No.
No, so
I don't think so. Do
So if
you?
I make a motion to consideration and approval to review the ownership
So I talked with Bill.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Bill did say that it
So-
seemed reasonable for the finance committee
So just put it in the motion?
to put it in.
Okay.
Can I ask, is there a representative from each town?
By law, there is, yep.
So consideration and approval for the finance committee to review the CPAC cost sharing.
Yep. A second? Okay. Any other questions before we vote?
I guess I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Do we need to define, like, what that means? Like, does the finance committee meet once, 3 times, 5 times, do a report? Like, what are we asking? I'm just a little bit unclear. I'm not opposed to it,
I mean, I guess I would say the finance committee would meet as often as it needs to be able to come back with a recommendation, whether it's a recommendation to change it or whether it's a recommendation to maintain it. I mean, yeah, I don't know. But I believe the expectation would be that they would report back to the board on, for some action.
and then the board would presumably vote after that report?
Correct. Okay.
Do you have a second?
Kate, I think, seconded it. Yeah. Okay. All those in favor? Got him?
Yep.
Opposed? So 4. Okay.
Who's the one over
Candy. So that carries.
I did miss the, can you raise your hands again for the no? Thank you.
Okay. Well, we flew through that one. We had 30 minutes for that one. Okay. Public comment? You're good? Only one left. Okay, well then we're going to kick you out. It's time for executive session. So do we have a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 4056D for discussions relating to educator negotiations for RSU 5? Yes. Kate and Valley. In favor? None opposed. Thank you.